everyone tonight. If you get your songbooks, we'll sing song number 348. 348. And then we'll be led in prayer. Eric, would you mind leading prayer? We'll sing the first, second, and fourth verses. 348. Jesus is all the world to me, my life, my joy, my all. He is my strength from day to day. Without him I would fall. When I am sad, to him I go. No other one can cheer me so. When I am sad, he makes me glad. He's my friend. Jesus is all the world to me, my friend in trials sore. I go to him for blessings, and he gives them more and more. He sends me sunshine and the rain. He sends the harvest, golden grain. Sunshine and rain, harvest of grain. He's my friend. Jesus is all the world to me. I want no better friend. I trust him now. I'll trust him when life's fleeting days shall end. Beautiful life with such a friend. Beautiful life that has no end. Eternal life, eternal joy. He's my friend.
Let us pray. Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy great and holy name. Father, we're indeed thankful for this opportunity we have to come study thy word. We pray that everything that's done this day, this evening, will be in accordance with thy will. Father, we're mindful of all the ones that we know in our congregation that are sick. We'd ask that you would be with and comfort them and return them to their health and be thy will. Father, we're also mindful of the ones in the community that have lost loved ones, and we'd ask that you would be with them during their time of sorrow. Father, we're mindful of our great country, and we'd ask that you would be with our leaders, give them the conviction to look to thee and thy word for their guidance. Father, we're also mindful of our military men and women, and we'd ask that you would be with them and their families and return them home safe. We pray thy will. Father, now as we go through the remainder of this night, we'd ask that you would be with us and we would be attentive and take something away and use it in our everyday lives. And most of all, we are thankful for Jesus who paid the ultimate price for our sins, that we might have hope of heaven one day. Forgive us for our many sins, in Christ's name. Amen. David's supposed to be blank.
Yes, it is.
All right. I thought I would ask. There had to be one, right?
Yeah, I knew that was going to be the first question. We're picking up with King David. Eric's prayers now pray for our leaders to turn to God. There's a lot of things that we're going to talk about in a few minutes that it applies to leaders of countries, but it also applies to people. From the smallest to the largest, if you think about it, the sins that we all struggle with and all are faced with are universal. It doesn't matter many times our ethnic group, our age, status. This is a good way to look at it too. Some of the things obviously we're talking about is King David. And if you will, open your Bibles to 2 Samuel. And we're going to pick up with reading of 2 Samuel chapter 11. And go into some of the things that are taught there and some of the things that are talked about there. And what I was going to do on the sheet of paper was, when we get to the question after we read the chapter, just do like number 1 through 10 on the left, and then maybe make some drawings or something to kind of key around on the right-hand side of the paper. So it did mean this to be a blank piece of paper. So I wasn't going to do the questions, but we're going to go with a blank piece of paper this morning, or this afternoon. Trina, if you will, pick up with 2 Samuel 11, verse 1, if you will, read a few verses you want to, and we'll pass it around and get to the end of chapter 27.
And it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when the king set forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon, and besieged Rabbah, but David tarried still at Jerusalem. And it came to pass in eventide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman. And one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers, and took her, and she came in to him, and he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned unto her house. And the woman conceived and sent, and told David, and said, I am with child. And David sent Joab, saying, Send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. And when David was come unto him, David demanded of him how Joab did, and how the people did, and how the war prospered. And David said to Uriah, Go down to thy house and wash thy feet. And Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of meat from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and went not down to his house. And when they told David, saying, Uriah went not down unto his house, David said to Uriah, Camest thou not from thy journey? Why then didst thou not go down unto thy house?
And Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and abide in tents and my Lord. Joab and the servant of my Lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go into my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife, as thou livest, and as thou so livest, I will not do this thing. And David said unto Uriah, Tarry here today also, and tomorrow I will let thee depart. So Uriah abode in Jerusalem that day and tomorrow. And when David had called him, and he did eat and drink before him, and he made him drunk, and at even he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his Lord, but went not down to his house.
And it came to pass in the morning that they wrote a letter to Joab, and sent it by the hand of Uriah, and he wrote in the letter, saying, that you set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And it came to pass when Joab was in the city, that he assigned Uriah to a place where that violent men were, and the men of the city went out and fought with Joab, and there fell some of the people and spoke to David, and Uriah died also. Then Joab sent and obeyed all the things concerning the war, and charged the messenger, saying, when thou hast made the end of telling matters of the war unto the king, and it is so big that the king's wrath arise, and he said to thee, wherefore approach ye so nigh unto the city, and ye did fight. Ye did not that they which ye from the wall, who smote Abimelech the son of Jerubbaal, did not only cast a piece of himself and stone him from the wall, that he died in Jabez's cloud, and he died of the wall. Then say thou, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also.
So the messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger said to David, the men came and invaded over us, came out against us in the field, but we drove them back to the entrance of the gate. Then the archers shot at your servants on the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. David said to the messenger, thus shall you say to Joab, do not let this matter displease you, for the sword devours now one and now another. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, and encourage it. When the wife of Uriah heard that her husband was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the morning was over, David sent and brought her to his house and said, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord.
Appreciate that. This is not one of David's finest hours. Obviously, if you think about his life, the things we've studied here in this class, when he was with his father, I read a couple of people who had some behind-the-scenes ideas about why he was this way as the king that had received power. When they came looking for the next king, Jesse's, his father, who was the last one of his sons to show the priest? David. Kind of leading into that answer. He was not in his mind, there was always a little doubt. He was working with fields, tending the sheep. I think it's kind of interesting that the story of the sheep is brought up in the next chapter about the rich man's sheep and the poor man's sheep. It's kind of a circular story to think about it. Here he was, king, and his men were sent to war. Number one, if you will, write down the question. Who did David send to battle? And it's found in verse number 1 that we read. Different versions have said that this was the first of his downfalls. Who did he send to the battle?
Joab and his servants.
Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel. I think that all Israel might be a little telling also. He was left alone in the king's house. He was more or less to his own devices, if you think about it. Just a chapter or two above, I noticed earlier that even in the chapter just before this, David and the children of Ammon, they set foot, fought with the Syrians and Bereans and Ammonites. And even in verse 17, it was told David, and he gathered all Israel together and passed over Jordan and came to Hebron, and the Syrians set themselves in array against David and fought with him. That's not the 3 verses before David's in the king's palace. And his men are still at battle, still at war, and David's not with them. Question number 2. Where did David go? That's true. He was in Jerusalem. He didn't leave. You're right. That's the next verse. The point there I was kind of making was he didn't go with Joab in the army. He stayed home. For whatever reason, we're not told, but a lot of people looked at the timing and saying that he was starting to see that he was powerful. He was blessed. He was the king now. He'd gotten over a severe army complex, and now he was the man. And that's going to come back to bite him shortly. Joab obviously was a man of war, knew what to do, knew how to do battle, and he carried on even in David's absence. But he didn't go anywhere. He stayed in Jerusalem, and he did go on the king's rooftop. So all the answers were correct. Number 3, whose house and bed was David staying in? Verse number 2. Whose house was it? It was the king's house. To kind of point it out, to kind of reiterate the point, he was the top man. In all the nation of Israel, he was the king. We read there, number 4. The woman was not known and was a stranger in Jerusalem. True or false? The woman whom David saw was not known and was a stranger in Jerusalem. A couple head shakes. That's not true. She was known. You look there in verse 3. One of his servants said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" There's 2 very telling statements that David knew, A, who she was, and number 2, she was married. Didn't care. He kept going. If you look down into the next question I've got here, it says one of the men knew her by name, and also David, there's a form of evidence that Eliam's daughter was the son of Philiath, who was one of David's own advisors. So not only did he know her, he probably knew her dad and granddad. It wasn't somebody that was a stranger. She was known by David. The next thing I asked was, did David know she was married? And the answer, of course, was yes. Look at number, we're next. Okay, number 8. When we read number 4, verse number 4, or 3 and 4, let's go ahead back to 3 and 4. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" And David sent messengers, took her, and came unto him, and he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned to her house. Emily, you got the verse. What does those 2 verses say?
And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, "It's not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, and she had been purified herself.
Okay. That's more or less the same verse, same words that I was using in King James. There are translations there that refer to he sent messengers and took her. He sent guards and basically kidnapped her. It's not one phrase that one of the authors in his commentary talked about. This is not a love story. fantasize about it being, it was a dreadful sin. That's all it was. Call it what it is. Today, when a man and woman do the same thing that David did, it's still a sin. But in this case, it was told also that the age difference, David being the king, obviously, Bathsheba probably had no way or nothing to say against whatever was happening to her. Basically, she had to do whatever the king demanded. So he had all the power, and she had none. Any comments about that? Like I said, I'm not sure what translation that guy was using, but he basically pulled the word messengers into sent his guards and kidnapped her, which puts a different line on anything about his thoughts. Their thoughts, they were obeying his orders. She returned to her house, verse 5. She conceived and sent and told David that I am with child, verse 5. What did David do in verse 6 immediately after he found out that Bathsheba was pregnant? He sent word to the battle, but he sent word saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab, being the follower, if you will, of David, his commander, sent Uriah to David. In that one verse, you can see the mind of David being played out. If I can just get him here, I can hide the sin. How many times in our lives have we tried to hide sin? We've talked about how sin is being progressive. We've talked about in classes about how at first you're walking with hand in hand with someone, communicating with someone, best friends, walking down the road of life. When you stop, you're standing, and then next thing you know, you're sitting in the places of the ungodly. Once it gets a hold of you, it's hard to let it go. David, in this case, like he said, he went and sent to get Uriah back home as quickly as possible. And it says that when Uriah was coming to him, David demanded of him how Joab did, and how the people did in the battle, and how the war prospered. Did David really care about the war at that time? I would argue no. I would argue he didn't really care. He was using that as a smokescreen, I guess, to get Uriah doing his duty, reporting to the king, doing what he should do, being if you think about it, a follower, a good soldier. He did what he was told. And then, verse 8, David says to Uriah, go down to the house and wash thy feet. And Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of meat from the king. That mess of meat, was it leftovers and trash? Probably not. We're not told exactly what it is. The King James, a mess of meat, it was a lot. It was a feast. It was a banquet. It was the best the king had. He wanted Uriah to eat, drink, and be merry. He needed to hide his sin. So he was, his plan, did it work or did it not work? Verse 9. What did Uriah do that night? Stayed in the gate. In a way, you can kind of see David's mind and think, if I sit in this feast down to the sheep of Uriah, my sins, I can hide them, I can cover it up, I can move on. I shouldn't have done this, but I can get away with it. But Uriah doesn't even go down to his house. He says, he set the door of the king house with all the servants of his lord, David, and went not down to his house at all. So there was a fault in David's plan there. Uriah didn't do what he thought he would do. Uriah was a just man, obviously, had strong feelings about the war that was going on. He got pulled out of it. The children of Israel were still encamped in open fields, as Glenda read. They were still out in the battle. They were still dying. They were still being killed. And he didn't want any part of taking it easy at home. verse 10, David says, "Camest thou not from thy journey? Why did thou not go down to thy house?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah abide in tents, and my lord Joab and his servants, my lord, are encamped on the open fields. Shall I then go into my house and eat and drink and lie with my wife? As thou livest, as thy soul liveth, I will not do this thing." He was all in as a soldier, following David. Even the next verse, basically David says, "Okay, stay basically another day," and he was thinking that he could try to do something different. Obviously, what's different in verse 13 than sending a message back to Uriah's house? What seems a little bit different there?
He just had him meet with them.
David and Uriah. When David called for him, he'd eat and drink before him, and he made him drunk. So you're not going to go back to your house on your own. I'm going to get you drunk enough. You got to get to the house. And even then, Uriah had enough sense about him to not go down to his house. That he still knew that it wasn't right for him to be basically blessed and comforted at home when his fellow soldiers were dying. I've always thought this was kind of ironic and kind of a weird question of mine. From verse 14, let me rephrase that. Started with, knowing that Uriah was a just man, knowing that Uriah was an honest person, did David think there was any chance that Joab would read the note or read the letter between him leaving Jerusalem and getting back to the war?
It's probably sealed anyway, the king sealed for stuff,
it would have been known, but he also knew, and I think David knew, that whatever he told Uriah to do, he would do. If he told him to take it back, he was going to take it back and deliver the message to Joab and the army. And what did the note say, verse 15, about Uriah the Hittite, where he would be put in battle? Front line. I think the hottest battle is one of the phrases. And what were Joab's men to do after he'd been put in that hottest part of the battle? What words used there? I think it's retire ye from him. What does that mean? Pull back. You set him up to failure. You set him up to be killed. So these men were following David's command. David told them to put him in the hottest part of the battle and then draw back from him that he may be dead, may be spent and die. Although David wasn't there, we know that David had Uriah killed. Even David's response later on was kind of, sort of off one as well as another, and he kind of blows it off like, it's no big deal. You didn't do it, don't worry about it. He was the king, and he thought he was getting away with everything. The valiant men in verse 16, Joab knew where the valiant men were. What does that mean to us as far as looking for the hottest spot of the battle? Some of the best of your enemies. He knew that this was where the valiant men were. Joab being a man of war, we've seen it in wars. We've read other stories about where the weakest part of the wall is where everybody attacks. And this was the strongest part of the wall. And even the tactic that is used here to have Uriah killed is in question. And the men of the city went out and followed Joab, and there fell some of the people in service of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. So at that point, David's plan of having Uriah killed was successful. Joab's message today in verses 18 through 24. Joab sent a messenger concerning the war back to David. And what was he supposed to tell the king? Verses 19 and 20.
Well, it says in 18 he was supposed to give a full account of the battle.
Concerning the war.
And then it says, then it asks a question.
If the king's wrath arise, they shall say unto thee, wherefore approached ye so nigh to the city, and why did you not fight? Know ye not that they would shoot from the wall? Joab knew that what he had done was not smart as far as military tactics. If you think about approaching a wall of a city that's defended well, you're easy prey when you're walking under the wall. And it even references another, I couldn't find it, but there's another battle that has that 21. And it talks about a woman. Did not a woman cast down a millstone upon him from a wall, and he died in Tebez. So there are military records, historical facts that when you're defending or when you're attacking a city that's got good walls, you don't get close. You stay away, wear them out, drown them out, starve them out, but you don't go straight up to the wall. In this case, they went up to the wall, and as soon as the battle started getting hot, they drew back, and Uriah was dead. I think it's interesting, we look at the last phrase in verse 21. And if thy king's wrath arise, he shall say unto thee, wherefore ye approach thee nigh to the city, when ye did fight. What was the key at the last phrase in verse 21? That was I guess, sadly, the icing on the cake. That was, if David gets mad and next, tells us, we should have known better. Until Uriah hit that, he's dead. And basically, Joab knew that was the main point of his actions. He was obeying what David wanted him to do. Verse 22, or question number 12 or 13 now, just whatever next question you got there. Using verse 22. So the messenger went and came and showed David part of what Joab had said to him. Not all. True or false? False. The messenger, just like Uriah, did exactly what he was told. No difference. And Uriah to the left told him exactly what was said. The men rebelled against us and came out to the field, and we were upon them even to the entering of the gate. And then verse 24 talks about the shooters shot down from the wall, and some of the king's servants are dead, and the servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So before David's wrath gets fired up, he throws that in. And then, verse 25, when David said, let not this thing displease thee, what is he telling Joab? Don't be upset. Do exactly what I want you to do. And, the sword divider, one or the other. He just kind of, this is, he almost makes it sound like just a normal, everyday routine, act in battle. But it wasn't. The sword divider for one as well as another. That's not true. If he hadn't put Uriah in the hottest part of the battle and drawn back from it, Uriah probably would have died. If he hadn't went up to the wall, Uriah probably would have died. But he did exactly what David wanted. And Uriah the Hittite was killed. David also told Joab to withdraw from the city and come back to Jerusalem. True or false in verse 25 and 26. That's false. If you look there, he basically accomplished what he wanted. He lost, not told exactly how many men the children of Israel were killed during this battle. But when he had heard that Uriah, the wife of Uriah, heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. And I'll jump down to verse 25. Let us sing displeased that the sword of our one as well as another. Make thou battle more strong against the city and overthrow it. And encourage thou him. So he encouraged Joab and the men. Turn up the heat, get it over with, take the city. He did not say come back to Jerusalem. He did not say withdraw. He had accomplished what he wanted, basically having Uriah killed. Then verse 26 was when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. When the time of mourning, it said that when the time of mourning was past. How long was that? Are we told how long that time of mourning for a dead husband was? How long was that? I haven't found anything that says there's a certain set time for that mourning. But verse 27, David waited until the time of mourning was past and fetched her to his house. That word fetched, I'm not real sure if it's the same word as when you see messengers that took her and brought her to him back in verse 4 and 5. I'm not sure if that's the same word or not, but it's probably not an option. You're going to come, you're going to live with the king, adding a little bit to the phrases there. David fetched her to his house, and she became his wife and prepared to give a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. That last phrase there, displeased the Lord. And all the things that David has done up until now, is this the first time that David is displeased to God? Is this the first time that David sinned? No, it's not the first time. He is several. If you go back through the different chapters, there's several times that he had sinned. He was a man of war. He was considered a man of God, but he had a lot of sin in his life, especially this one. Was probably the most outrageous and probably the most cynical in a way. To have someone that has so much power and take the life of one of his servants, a faithful servant. He wasn't a traitor. He was a faithful servant that was in his heart. And looking back through time, look at this with disgust. When we're at work tomorrow and we hear about someone getting a divorce or having a problem or having an affair, what's our attitude toward that today? Are we disgusted or that kind of figured, thought something was going on? If we're not careful, we get cynical just like David did. And you say, well, that's the way life goes. We need to be on guard as Christians. Look for those opportunities to look for people that are struggling, I guess. Look for people that don't have a solid background in the Bible and try to get a steady book. I think that's the only thing we've got left now is an opportunity to find someone that's really in need. Because most of the people that we run into now don't have a need for Christ, don't have a need to be saved. They think they're already saved. I found out on the website the other night that sounded like the Church of Christ, sounded great, and then had the sinner's prayer at the end of it. It's just kind of blew me away that it should be that close and then lead that many people away. Like I said, it's on the internet. If you do 3 or 4 searches about the Church of Christ, the way of salvation, God's plan to save man, you'll be surprised what you'll come up with. 9 times out of 10, it will not be the church, true church. And it will never end in confessing your sin and being baptized like the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8. It'll be saying this prayer, admit that you're a sinner, and accept Him as your Savior. That's all part of it, but that's not what all the Bible says. So I'm kind of getting a little off base on that round. But any comments about this before we close out for the night? What I was going to do with the blank piece of paper, I was going to have you draw a flock of sheep. You can do this for homework. Take a couple of days. If you want to, you can use acrylic paints, paint it up real nice for something. But do a flock of sheep. Do a crown, which represents King David. And both of those were king for David. David in the field, David as a king. And then do the slaying of the stones that David used to kill Goliath. One of the greatest times that we think about David when he was at the place he needed to be. He was serving God, worshiping God, and had no fear. God was with him. This is, to me, kind of going back to just in the bottom right-hand corner, just our two sheep. The sheep of the rich man and the sheep of the poor man. And that'll lead us into, Lord willing, next time we meet with chapter 12. Talking about when Nathan comes to David and came unto him and said to him, there were two men in one city, and one rich and the other poor. It's interesting how that turns, and we see David getting angry again, and then the famous phrase, thou art the man. What happens after that? If not, no more comments, questions, we'll draw to a close on this, and we're willing to be back to the normal next week. And appreciate your attendance, your questions, and also paying attention and reading for us. I do appreciate it every time we're here, and look forward to seeing you Sunday morning. Thank you. It's going to be a good one on the way home. Yeah.
It was on the field outside. It was still in the I
Before we're dismissed, we'll go ahead and do the announcements and then have the invitation. The announcements that I have from Sunday, Betty Jo Hartley has completed her cancer treatments and praying that any of the results there. Ronnie Martin's home, brother and sister Raines, and also the Douglas family, still struggling with various sickness. It's good to see Ed and Dixie, and also Rachel out tonight, doing better. Remember Ramona Bell, Lois's mom, and Will Stone. We also mentioned Timmy Butler, Sue's son, and also Robertson man also. The family of Mike Clark, he passed away. Keep his family in prayers also this week. That's all the announcements that I have. We didn't add any more. I know there's a lot of people traveling on the road. Just check on them and pray for them. And if there's anybody else that's sick, we'll watch the Sunday, if you will. Again, appreciate you being here, and thank you again.
If you would, turn in your songbooks to 781, the Song of Invitation. 781. So I was thinking about the invitation tonight. I went back to consider what we've been talking about in our Sunday morning class in Galatians. I'm going to read from Galatians 5:16 through 26. It says, "And this I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. But if ye be led by the Spirit, ye are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulation, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, reveling, and such like, of which I tell you before, as I have also told you in times past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And they that are Christ have crucified the flesh with the afflictions, with the affections and lust. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be desirous of vain glory, provoking one another, envying one another." The thing that really stood out to me was in verse 17, where it said, "The Spirit, or the flesh, lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh." When I think of lust, I think most of us think about, the evil, sinful part of lust. But this is saying that the Spirit lusts against the flesh. It means it desires and eager to possess the opposite of the flesh. So while we don't normally think of this, or while I don't normally think of this when I think of lust, it makes me consider what Paul, through the inspiration of God, what his meaning is, when I wouldn't necessarily use those words. I wouldn't say, it seems contrary to me to say the Spirit lusteth against the flesh. but that longing and desire and eagerness to move away from the flesh and to be apart from the flesh, that's exactly what is being talked about here. As I've recently had a great deal of time to think and consider my path and my actions, much of my life, I think, has been led by the flesh. And I've been in the church. I've been in Christian schools. I've had a good education in the Bible. I know what it says. And it's hard for me to see that, I spend a lot of my time working to have a lot of money or, to have a good career or whatever fleshly peace I think there is. And so what prevents me from my focus, obviously, it's the flesh lusting against the spirit. So what do I do to fix it, or what do we do to fix it? We all must replace the manifestation of the flesh with the fruits of the spirit. And whatever your vices are, you must be willing to replace them and spend your time and energy and determine how you be led by the Spirit. God set out a path for us to follow. We need to spend our time in the Bible on a regular basis so that we can be led by the Spirit. And then we need to pray when we fall away and follow the flesh. And each minute of studying is a minute that we don't focus on the flesh. So I'll leave you with an invitation by reading verses 22 and 23 again. It says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. If you do these things daily, the flesh is pushed further and further away, and the Spirit presses the flesh away." So the question for everyone is, we need to ask ourselves, are we in a weak position where we're living in the flesh and flesh lusteth against the Spirit? Are you in a strong position where your spirit is helping you and lusteth against the flesh? If you need to change your focus tonight, please make time to do so. If you're not a child of God and want to make a change tonight, or if you need the help and prayers of the congregation, feel free to come forward as we stand and sing. Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, wake the immortal strain. Angels with raptures announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love, wonderful, 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 wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love. Jesus provides a rest, wonderful story of love, for all the pure and blessed. Rest in those mansions above us, with those who've gone on before us, singing a rapturous chorus. Wonderful story of love, wonderful, 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 wonderful story of love.
ill. God, we ask you to be sick, the ones that lost loved ones, comfort them, give the ones traveling, give them a safe trip back to us. Father, we ask now as we go through the remainder of the week, we, as Christians should, and shine our light